Okay, so hot take time. Ever since the invention of the remote control, there's no real practical reason to have children, right? Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all of the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out the introduction video. There's a link to it in the description below, and it's going to give you a pretty good sense of what we do here at the Horror Movie Syllabus. In short, we look at a particular subgenre of horror, and then we pick 3 movies from that subgenre to explore. But this is our doctorate level selection video series where we revisit a subgenre we've already looked at before, do a quick recap or summary of what we looked at previously, and then pick a new 4th doctorate level selection. A new movie, maybe a little bit deeper cut, a little bit less known or more obscure movie to add to the conversation for that subgenre. And the subgenre that we're revisiting today is creepy children. And creepy children is fun because that's kind of a horror trope, really. We've talked about a lot of movies in a lot of various subgenres that have a creepy child in there. It's just kind of a fun thing. A lot of people get really creeped out by it. I get a little creeped out by it. I'm not exactly a big fan of children to begin with. So it's fun to have the creepy child trope in horror. But these were movies where the creepy child was front and center, where the story or the plot or the movie had the creepy child as either the central part of the plot, the main character, or it was a key component to the story, a key plot point, something like that. So that was how we distinguished these movies from every other movie that has a creepy child in it, is to make sure that these ones, the kids were front and center. They were the creepy children were the point of the movie, or a major point of the movie. And I think we found some really good ones to talk about. And let's go ahead and just give you a quick recap of what we talked about right now. The first creepy child movie that we talked about in our previous video was Pet Sematary. And to be honest, I spent a lot of time kind of bashing that movie a little bit because I'm not a fan. I don't like Pet Sematary pretty much at all. And it was pretty clear in the video that I didn't like it. And I even talked about how it almost didn't make the syllabus in part because I don't like it, but that there's so many other people that love it. And I made the argument that maybe it was popular amongst people that were maybe a little younger than me, that were younger when they saw it, and therefore had a bit of nostalgia for it, had a bit of a feeling for it, or it was more effective for them because they were younger, and that it didn't hit for me in the same way. Because I made the argument that it's not really objectively all that well made. The acting's not particularly good. It kind of looks like a TV movie. It's not a great movie, but it does have that cult following. It did have to be mentioned on the syllabus because a lot of people love it. They love the Stephen King story that it's based on. I felt like a lot of things fell short, but there were still some things to acknowledge as being good. One of the main ones being Gage, the little kid who's a creepy kid in there. And that was the reason why I ultimately decided last minute to make the cut and talk about it on the syllabus. But yeah, it doesn't really wind up being one of my favorites. I don't think it's very good. And I know I'm in the minority on that one, I think. So there's that. And the second movie that we talked about was Orphan. And I struggled a little bit to talk about Orphan in the previous video because I really didn't want to spoil things in the movie. And if you've seen the movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But it was really hard to talk about that movie without spoiling it and explain why I enjoyed it so much, because part of why I enjoyed it so much is a bit of a surprise. And again, you know what I'm talking about. But I did talk about the acting, and in particular, I focused on Vera Farmiga as the mom, and Isabel Furman as the Isabel Furman as the orphan, the young girl, and the performances that they're giving, and how it really works. Talked a little bit about Peter Sarsgaard too, and how the acting is a large part of what sells what is ultimately kind of a ridiculously campy concept, but it works really well because the acting's taking it seriously, and it's just a well-made movie. But it goes some really crazy places, and the movie should slide off the rails, and kind of does. Again, don't want to spoil things, but it gets held together by a really strong cast and a really strong directing effort, and really winds up making it to be kind of a thrilling movie that just kind of goes a little bit bonkers in a way that I'm totally down for the ride on. And so I didn't want to spoil it, but I did want to talk about it to people and kind of promote it as being one to watch. And the last movie that we talked about in the video was The Omen. And I talked about this one because it was a bona fide horror classic. It really is kind of one of the quintessential creepy child movies. In fact, you know, the character Damien that name in pop culture has become synonymous with like creepy child and spawn of Satan, which is of course what the movie's about. And it really is kind of in our pop culture lexicon because of this movie. And it was a little bit weird that I didn't put it in like the religion subgenre and I put it here. But again, I felt like the creepy child was like a really big takeaway from this movie, a really key aspect of the movie. So I feel like it had to be here. And I talked about how, again, it's a horror classic. It's a bona fide modern classic. And part of that's because of the pedigree. It's got Richard Donner as director. It's got Gregory Peck as the star. It really had a solid, at the time, solid, noteworthy pedigree of really great actors involved in it that give it a certain legitimacy that holds up to this day. It's considered a classic to this day, transcends the genre, really. So it had to be brought up on the syllabus somewhere, and this was the place that I chose to talk about it because, again, I felt like the horror, the creepy child aspect of it was a big part of the movie that needed to be acknowledged and recognized. So those were our selections in our previous video for creepy children horror movies, but now let's add a new fourth doctorate level selection. Our doctorate level selection for the creepy children subgenre is Alice Sweet Alice. Alice Sweet Alice came out in 1976, and it's funny that this movie is what I wound up choosing because it wasn't so long ago that I hadn't even actually seen this movie, but I thought I had. I think we even had like a trivia question about the movie, and I got it wrong because I was thinking of something else and getting it confused, and it turned out I hadn't seen this movie, so after that question, I went and saw the movie, and it's syllabus worthy. Yes, it is. I'm talking about it here. It definitely had to get its way onto the syllabus, and I'm kind of sad that I slept on it as long as I did because it's got a lot going for it and a lot to talk about. So we're gonna go ahead and just dive right into it. First, if you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a family of four, a mother, a father, and two daughters. And the youngest daughter is taking her first communion when she is shockingly murdered during the first communion. And it's a mystery as to who's done it, but there is a lot of evidence to support that the older sister Alice may be the culprit as more and more bodies start to show up and Alice is acting very, very strange. And there's a lot of weird hijinks going on. But of course, we're going to stop there so as to not spoil it for anybody. But the movie is quite a trip for a number of reasons, not the least of which is some of the behind the scenes stuff or the pedigree of it, the history of it, if you will. First and foremost, the movie is directed by a man named Alfred Soule, and this is his feature debut, but he's more known as a production designer, a rather accomplished production designer. He's done work on a lot of things that you've probably seen or at least are familiar with, but this was his first movie. And he's really making it as a kind of a, almost not quite a do-it-yourself because he's actually got some money, but he's not really sure what he's doing. And he's getting like theater actors to do this, local actors. And yet you'd never guess by looking at the movie because it looks great. It's shot very well. It's paced very well. Everything is working really, really well. We're going to get into it a little bit more deeply in there. But another reason that this movie has kind of got a bit of notoriety or history behind it is it's the film debut of Brooke Shields, who at the time was a model, and she was a child actor. And this was her first movie. And while this movie wasn't her breakout role, she got more attention for Pretty Baby and then after that Blue Lagoon. But the breakout of Pretty Baby and the controversy around that movie, look it up for yourself if you want to know, it kind of reignited interest in this movie when it got re-released. And this movie had a couple of different titles. That Under Communion was a title for it. And then it got changed to this. And I think there was another title for a little while too. But it really had an interesting kind of startup to it. And it warranted fighting its way to getting seen and getting to the cult love status that it eventually got to because, like I said, it's just really well made. It's really interesting, and it's wearing some of its influences on its sleeve. It's influenced by the movie Don't Look Now, which we've talked about more than once on the channel. Actually, we did discuss the movie, and then it popped up in conversations because it's a very influential movie, and embarrassingly, one that only made extra credit on this channel, which. Don't even get me started. It's one of the biggest embarrassments of this channel. But anyways, it's got the Don't Look Now influences, which are kind of obvious. There's a little girl in a raincoat, and that's a recurring motif throughout the movie. And it's a different color raincoat, but it's very clearly wearing that influence on its sleeve. And it's got a lot of Hitchcock, love or homage in it. The score is very Psycho influenced. It's very very clear, intentionally so. It's trying to leverage the violence from Psycho, and it's doing it in a really really good way. But it's also influenced by the Giallo films from Italy, and in fact, when you look at a lot of the reviews and critiques and commentary on this, of which there is a lot, they often refer to this as like the true U.S. or American giallo film, and I think that's a really apt explanation for it, a really apt comparison, because it does have a lot of the tropes and influence of the giallo subgenre in it. You know, the way it uses certain colors, like the yellow raincoat, for example, the way the kills are shot, and they're kind of like a little slightly surreal, but also really kind of graphic and disturbing. The mystery aspect of this, and kind of the little bit far-fetched aspect of who the killer is and stuff like that, it all screams giallo. Now, it doesn't completely like breathe and live in giallo, because there's a certain stylishness to giallo films, at least the ones that I like and think of. This falls a little short of that, but only a little. And we're talking about a first-time feature director, and he's coming really darn close to being, you know, in the style of like Argento or Bava, and that's saying a whole lot. He's not touching those guys. Let me be clear. But the fact that he's doing kind of an homage or an American version of that I think holds its own is extremely noteworthy. It's really impressive for Alfred Soul to be doing that right out the gate, and it's worth noting. You know, so I also think that they've captured in a lot of the aspects of the story of a GL too. Like the acting is very melodramatic, and I think it's intentional. The characters are very big and broad, and there's a lot of really clever camera work, clever camera angles, and way that they shoot things to make things really, you know, to add to the dread or add to the intrigue of it. It's working for me a lot. Like it's really a well-made movie, but it's also got so much more going on behind the scenes. I mentioned, you know, Brooke Shields, of course. There's also a lot of controversy about this movie. This wasn't like a video nasty, but there is a lot of controversy about what people consider to be anti-Catholic themes in the movie, which I'll be honest with you, I don't really get. I don't see it. Like there is a character in here that is, bad, that is Catholic, that devout Catholic, but there's also multiple characters, most of the characters in the movie, that are devout Catholics that are not bad. They're good. So I don't see this being some sort of anti-Catholic riff or diatribe or whatever. And the director doesn't seem to feel that way either, and at least what I've read about it. And so I think that's a little bit overblown, but it's a pervasive critique of the movie. There is also a scene in the movie with a pedophile who's trying to attack a child, and that his cat gets hurt, gets assaulted in a way. It's pretty disturbing, and according to the director, the cat was not actually hurt. It's just shot in a way to make it look really disturbing. It looks really disturbing, and that I didn't love that, but that was another thing that gave it a lot of controversy and gave it a lot of critique upon its release. But those themes, like the religion theme or the anti-religious theme, and the theme of family, and like the family dynamic of these two sisters, one of which is being accused of killing the other one, and the relationship that they have with their parents, in particular the mom, because the parents are separated, and the separation of the parents and what it means for the nuclear family, all this stuff gets talked about a lot. There's a lot of dissertation on this movie, people delving into these themes, taking it very, very seriously, which I think is cool, because I think it deserves to be taken very seriously. Even though the movie's got a slight camp aspect to it, it's really, really deep, or you can dig deep meaning out of it. And it's ostensibly a killer in a creepy mask, and the mask, by the way, is excellent. It really looks good, but underneath the surface, there's so much more. And then again, like there's so many interesting things outside of the movie itself, like the fact that it lost its copyright status at some point, and then for like decades, like a decade plus, and then in the '90s they did like a re-edit of it. Alfred Soul did a re-edit of it so they could reclaim copyright for it. And the original version was bootlegged for ages legally because there was no copyright protection of it. Right? And there's also the story about Linda Miller, who plays the mom in the movie, and how she apparently like slit her wrist during filming when the climactic scene, and you can kind of see bandages on her wrist in some of the scenes because she's post the injury, and like crazy stuff going on in this movie that just makes it really interesting. But that's not to take away from the fact that the movie itself is interesting. It's a compelling mystery. It's shot wonderfully. The characters are really interesting and fun. The performances are solid. Like I said, they're kind of melodramatic and big intentionally, and it totally works for the movie. And it's interesting also that this movie, when it got released, got these mixed reviews at the time, partly because of the anti-Catholic accusations and the cat scene and the controversy with Brooke Shields and stuff and just a lot of noise about it that I think made it get mixed reviews and released overseas. But it did get a little bit more love as it went on. Like as time went on, it got reevaluated, and there's a subsequent cult love for it that has helped it to endure to this day. And I'm in that camp. Fantastic movie, really, really great. And again, I thought I'd seen it before, and maybe I was confusing with it. Don't look now. I don't remember what movie I was confusing it with, but I thought I'd seen this movie. I hadn't. I went and rectified that. You should too if you haven't seen this. Check this movie out. It's really great. It's really outstanding. Again, it's 1970s, so it's got that 70s pacing. So for some people who don't like older movies, that might be a bit of an issue. But overall, I'd say this is going to hit for most everybody. It's really wonderful. And if you've seen it before, let us know what you think in the comments below, because I'm super high on this one, and I suspect that most of you probably are too. So that's our doctorate level selection for the creepy children subgenre. But as always, I've got a extra credit selection to look at as well. And this is one that I really like that I think deserves a little bit more love. So let's go ahead and get right into it. Our extra credit selection is Cub. And Cub came out in 2014 and is another first-time director feature debut. This one is Jonas Govertz. Govertz, I'm not 100% sure I'm saying the name right. Hope I am. Sorry if I'm not. And it's a Belgian film, even though and I think the language is Dutch. Maybe it's French. I also heard a little English in there. I'm not entirely sure. It's a subtitled movie. Let's just say that. And it's a first-time director, but it's a really good one that I remember at the time getting a lot of buzz and then just kind of died out. I don't hear people talk about it that much, so we're going to talk about it right now. If you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a troop of Cub Scouts that go out for a camping trip with a couple of Scoutmasters. And one of the boys is kind of bullied by the other boys and even by one of the Scoutmasters. He's a little bit troubled, a little bit off, and a little bit ostracized. And they keep hearing these stories, the campfire stories about a feral boy in the woods who is actually a werewolf named Kai. And our protagonist boy runs into such a kid that he believes is Kai. It's a kid who's out in the woods doing his own thing, and hijinks abound as they tend to do in movies like this. But of course, we're going to stop there and not spoil it. And it's an interesting movie for a number of reasons, not the least of which is when it came out in Europe, it was given an all ages rating. And that's hilarious. It's hilarious because when you see this movie and how dark it gets and the violence that's in it, it's shocking that they'd give it an all ages rating. And that actually was a big controversy apparently when this movie came out, is that all ages rating, because it definitely doesn't deserve that. This movie is pretty dark, and especially because we're talking about violence to children, violence by children, creepy children, right? So part of what makes this movie work is the setting. You've got these kids out in the woods, and they're kind of in this area that's very isolated. Like, even when they're driving to the woods, the buildings are all kind of bombed out and everything. And I'm not really sure where it was that they filmed and everything, but it really adds to the whole isolation aspect of the movie, that this group of kids is really kind of cut off from everything. And then you're kind of seeing these little aspects of how they're being intentionally cut off from stuff. And then you've got this character, this child, this feral child, and the look of the kid is suitably creepy. Like, he looks very, very creepy, very off-putting, very unsettling, creepy, scary kid. But then you've got these bullies in the scout troop, and they're kind of worse. They're creepy kids in their own way because they're just jerks, right? They're terrible kids. And yeah, there's also a scoutmaster who's also a jerk, and there's a couple of scoutmasters that are good. But you've got these kids that are bullies, and you're like, well, which kid's the creepy kid? Is the creepy kid in the wood the creepy kid, or is the bullies a creepy kid, or he's even our protagonist a creepy kid because he's got a lot of problems and a lot of trouble too? The answer is yes, across the board. Creepy kids everywhere. It's part of the reason why I had to pick this movie for the extra credit here, because it needed to be talked about. The creepy kids, just chock full creepy kids in this movie. But the director, Jonas Gilberts, is doing a great job getting these performances out of these kids because they're really good performances. Everybody across the board is giving a really solid performance here, but the kids in particular are really good, and that's key because you're spending a lot of time with them, and it's not easy to do, especially for a first-time director. To draw a performance out of a kid is a challenge. That takes a real skill, and Jonas here has got that skill. He does a really good job of drawing the kid out, and he set up this really cool setting, and it's lit extremely well. It's shot extremely well. Again, you would not think this is a first time director when you saw this movie. It doesn't. It looks like a very seasoned, steady director, assured and confident, who knows what he's doing, knows technically how to get the right angles, the right shots, the right lighting, the right atmosphere, the right pacing. Everything about this movie is pretty solid. Like, it really is a well-made movie, and it draws you in really easily. I will admit the pace feels a little slow early on. It takes a little while to get going in terms of like action or scariness, but it's setting up the characters really well, and it's giving you a little bit of a taste of where these mysteries are going to go. And there is a bit of a mystery to it, but it pays off. Once the kills kick in, it doesn't take that long. And, the first act is a little slow, but after that, you get into act two, and the kills start happening. The pace really picks up. It really elevates, and it's got a little bit of like a slasher feel to it. You've got these Rube Goldbergian traps that happen that kind of kill people in weird and strange ways. So it gets a little bit of a kind of a slasher aspect. It's not really a slasher per se, but it's got aspects of that, which of course speaks to me. And we're talking about like kid violence. So there's some really dark stuff in here. The kid violence can probably rub people along. I kill all the kids you want, as far as I'm concerned. But wow, it can be really disturbing to some people. There is another simulated animal violence scene in here, where there's a dog that is getting beaten and gets killed, and it's pretty shocking and disturbing. But I do feel that it's kind of a necessary scene because it adds this layer of complexity to the story, because you're kind of rooting for your protagonist and this feral boy that he meets in the woods, because of these terrible bullies. But then this dog scene recontextualizes everything, and now you're kind of not rooting for them, because of their actions. You're kind of turning against them a little bit, which is an interesting twist in the movie that does drive the third act and make it make more sense. It really shows the darkness on your protagonist and why he might be acting the way he acts, and where things doesn't necessarily feel unearned at that point. I'm trying not to spoil it. I'm dancing around things a little bit, obviously. But as much as I found that scene to be disturbing, didn't really love that scene, I understood the importance of why it was in there and what it sets up going forward in the movie. And I think that was great. Ultimately, this movie winds up being a really fun ride. It's not perfect. Like, there's a lot of stuff that happens in this movie, a lot of twists and turns that happen in this movie that don't really get explained. Like, motivations for a lot of the characters don't really get explained. Like I said, even the main character has, some baggage or history or some off stuff about him, but we don't get a lot of spelling out of why that is. We get a little bit of exposition, but at the end of the day, this movie is a little shy on motivations for characters and explanations for why things are happening or why things are the way they are. But it's fun enough that you don't care. The traps are really fun. The kills are fun. The characters are good and interesting and memorable. And it winds up working really well as just a good time. Not nearly as deep as Alice Sweet Alice, though you could probably mine it for some interesting ideas or thoughts if you really wanted to. But honestly, just go along for the ride. It's a good time. Now, it didn't get a lot of love when it came out abroad. Again, that all ages thing really tainted it and gave it some controversy. But it did get well received in the US. And again, I remember hearing a lot of buzz about this. I liked it when it came out. I really enjoyed this. And so I felt like it's a really solid extra credit choice. It probably doesn't necessarily need to be discussed on the syllabus proper, but it did deserve to have a light shined on it because, again, that buzz seems to have died out. People don't seem to talk about this one very much. And I think it's great. I really have a good time with this one and think it needs to be seen more. So if you haven't seen it, by all means, check it out because it deserves your eyeballs. And if you've seen it, let us know in the comments what you think about it. Again, I'm a little high on it, but I think that people should see this one and talk about it a little bit more because it seems like a little bit of a hidden gem these days. So that's going to do it for our revisiting of the creepy children's subgenre. This is a fun subgenre. Creepy kids really work for me. All kids are creepy, right? Like we're all on the same page on that, right? Nobody likes kids. But these are fun movies. These are quality ones we're talking about today. So again, by all means, check them out if you haven't before. And now it's time, of course, to check out a Horror Trivia Pursuit card. It's that time of the video where I'm going to try to answer a question here live on camera. And given the movies we talked about today, let's go ahead and look at the killer category for the card, because both these movies involve killers. So that seems like a logical place for us to go. Okay, so here's our question for today. Who directed 1991's The Silence of the Lambs? I definitely 100% know the answer to this question. I don't necessarily think it's an easy question, because I don't think that, I don't know. This is a pretty well-known director, won the Academy Award for this movie, and pretty accomplished, well-known, has passed away now. There's a clue for you, but I don't know that this is necessarily the easiest question to answer, because it's not like this person's thought of as like a horror legend or anything like that. Which again, maybe is another clue for you, because it can help you eliminate some people that you might try to guess. But I do know the answer to this one. I love The Silence of the Lambs. I think it's damn near a perfect film. It really is. We've talked about it on the channel before, and we will maybe talk about it a little bit more in depth in the future. I've got something that I'm kind of working on that, if I can find the time to do, I think it'd be a nice new addition to the channel, and a little different approach, a little different take on horror movies. And Silence of the Lambs is the one that I want to start with. So more on that later. That's a little tease for you guys, a little vague tease for you. But Silence of the Lambs, of course, the seminal Hannibal Lecter movie with Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins, and just a brilliant movie, swept the Oscars. Wonderful movie, fantastic. And this is the director of it, who won again the Academy Award for it. And it is a, like I said, I feel like if you know this director, then you know this answer, but I don't necessarily know that you would know this director. So, maybe it's kind of hard. I don't know. Again, it feels easy for me, but it may not be easy for you. But it's time for you to start bottling up your answer, like button it down. Like this is time for me to go in and make my guess. So make your guess, lock it in, done. Okay, the answer is Jonathan Demme. And I know that because I know that. And let's just check the card. Jonathan Demme. Jonathan Demme, who died too soon, frankly. Died a few years ago. But a brilliant director, and this is, to me, his masterpiece. And it really is a masterpiece. It's a fantastic movie. And he was a fantastic director. And the directing in that movie is brilliant. I won't go into too much, because I think I talked about it in the channel before, where we talked about the movie. And also there are plenty of other YouTube videos that go into it in depth that are much better than I could do. But obviously, if you haven't seen Silence of the Lambs, check it out. If you haven't seen these videos about the making of Silence of the Lambs and the quality of the directing, check those out as well. But thank you guys very much for hanging out to the end. I really appreciate you. I really appreciate you guys leaving your input in the comments down below. Keep on doing that. We'll have more conversations about these movies down there. But until next week, when we look at something completely different, I'm just going to say, class dismissed. I mean, that's objectively creepy, right? Like, it's not just me.